Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to our Water Services Delivery Workshop. So today our agenda, we have feedback to hear from DIA, which would be good for us to discuss and consider this afternoon. But firstly, just apologies in person from Mayor Gary Kircher, who is attending online today, as well as Councillor Linwood. So yeah, welcome and thank you to those members of the public who have also joined us in chambers, as well as those who are watching online. And also thank you to our officers for organising today, and also a warm Tuesday afternoon Waitaki greeting to our governance team. Thank you. So I'll pass it over to our CE, Alex Palmley.
Thank you. I'm not going to say much, and pretty much going to go to DIA straight away, other than to apologise. We've been hastily putting in arrangements for today. We received the feedback yesterday evening after the close of business. So we've circulated that to councillors this morning, had a little time to really digest it, but I thought it'd be important to hear direct from DIA. So we're joined by Warren and Marlon from the DIA, who are going to take us through their feedback. Then we'd go to Stuart from Morrison Lowe, who's going to take us through what we think we can deal with within that feedback and areas where we might need some further discussion. And then we've got some information to share really around the financial sustainability and looking at some of the issues raised there and some thoughts around that before we go into what direction you want us to take and any guidance you want to give us in finalising our water services delivery plan, given that we're within a couple of weeks really of now having to get that to council for agreement. So with that, if you're happy, I'll hand over to Warren and Marlon to take us through their feedback. Yeah, we can't hear you at the moment, Warren.
Beg your pardon. Sorry. All good now? Yep. Kia ora koutou, Mayor and Councillors. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. As Alex said, we have provided a response to the draft that was submitted for assessment into DIA. That letter went through yesterday, and we thought it might be helpful to follow up and speak to you directly and answer any questions that you have. So I assume you have copies of the letter in front of you, or have had the opportunity to read it. I'll just note that it is written in a very bureaucratic way. Unfortunately, the language of Wellington. We thought that might be helpful, especially with Marlon here, to talk plainly to you and, as I say, answer any questions in a very straightforward manner. Just a reminder of previous conversations we've had, only with the view to help support and explain as clearly as we can. So just before we do that, I thought I might recap briefly. I know I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but it is very important to keep in mind the potential scenarios if the plan is not approved. And in this case here, we have identified at this stage a very wide gap between what's required to give approval to the water service delivery plan and what is needed to meet the test of financial sustainability. In that case, as I said previously, the decision lies with the Minister. We will have a role in advising the Minister. But I've explained before that there are two possibilities in terms of the intervention mechanisms open to the Minister. One is the facilitator, and the other is the water specialist. In the case of a water facilitator, Crown facilitator, what we're looking at there is a scenario where the plan is close, but more work is required, and someone that would work in with council but not have any decision-making powers. The water specialist has decision-making powers and more likely to be put into a situation where there's a significant gap, or where, based on the information available at the time the Minister makes the decision, there's a view that the gap is so big that actually something more significant needs to occur to get the water services plan or that particular council or group of councils to a point where they have a financially sustainable plan. As I say, I don't want to preempt any decision what the Minister might make, but what we've identified here is quite a significant gap. So I just want to be really clear. This is not a scenario of being quite close and a little bit more work getting it across the line. Some may have read the letter in that way because of the language used, but I think when Martin talks through the plan, you'll get a clearer understanding of how big we think that gap is. So in that case, in that scenario, what you'd be looking at there is somebody who comes in with the mandate and direction to develop a financially sustainable plan in the most expedient way they can, and sort of looking at that hypothetically, what they might look at then and go, all right, we need to join up with another grouping to get the scale that will be necessary to address these issues. At that point, what the specialist can do, they will have decision-making ability for that council, or there is a possibility that you might have a specialist that has been put in place over a number of councils to look at them in a group. They would then potentially reach out to existing groupings, and with the agreement of those groupings, then direct the councils to join. Now, the disadvantage in that scenario for the councils is that you're essentially taking what you're given from that existing grouping. So the existing grouping works together. They've developed their plan. They've had their shareholders agreements. They've worked through how they best want that to work. These sorts of things are in place, and then the secondary council or group of councils that is directed to join by the specialist essentially tacks on to that. It's a simplistic way of explaining it, but just to be really clear about the decreased amount of influence and the ability to be involved in the sort of foundational discussions around how that grouping operates. So I just wanted to highlight that as a really significant disadvantage of that scenario for the council. I've talked before about the importance of local water done well and Waitaki Council maintaining control over the decisions that are made and influencing the shape of the grouping if that's where it eventually ends up. So I'll come back and answer any questions, but I just wanted to talk through that one more time just to make sure that everybody's really clear about that scenario and how that might play out. So with that, I'll hand over to Marlon to talk through the letter and give a summary, and then we'll both be available to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren, and kia ora, councillors. So I think Warren's picked up on a couple of points, especially around the viability of the plan as we've seen it in draft and its ability to meet our thresholds. And I just want to break down what that means specifically. So obviously keen to take questions if that's what time permits, but in terms of the criteria that we're assessing this against, I'll just remind councillors of that. We're looking at 4 key criteria: financial sustainability, investment sufficiency, financing sufficiency, and environmental compliance. So if I break down each of those, we've got some issues in all of those categories. So with financial sustainability, the key issues there are around the affordability matrix, and in particular the fact that revenue is being secured upfront in the plan. So there's a 61% price increase, which we are concerned about in terms of the overall objectives of local water done well and how that meets that. If I talk about financing sufficiency, we've got a debt threshold of 500%, which is breached. And that's concerning in the relation to the fact that the council also needs to secure a credit rating in order to achieve those sorts of outcomes. Environmental compliance is a little different. We've got a lack of clarity around the understanding of what investments are being made to address which environmental outcomes. So that is merely a matter that could be addressed through tidying up the connection of what investments are required. But also under the investment sufficiency, we've got some concerns around what the actual level of investment is in order to address all the concerns that have been raised previously in prior annual reports and in the current plan to address matters such as environmental compliance and other matters related to that. So renewals, levels of service. So we're just sitting here looking at a plan that's taken an aggressive position on revenue early, has a late investment spend. You know, there's a plan that shows 40% of your capital spend will be done in the last 2 years. Issues around not covering depreciation, an unbalanced budget. So there's just a number of characteristics that aren't sitting favorably in terms of us assessing this as a pass at the moment. So again, I just wanted to highlight that. It's all written in the letter, albeit in government speak, but there are some issues that need to be addressed, and I'm happy to pass back by the chair or by Alex and answer any questions.
Thank you. I will give an opportunity for the councillors to be able to ask questions. Councillor Holding.
Through the chair, thank you. I think last week I couldn't be at the start of the workshops when I think both yous attended and LGFA, but just to in regard to the revenue prediction of the 10 years, the smoothing, was there a reason why it couldn't be smoothed? Or I know maybe it was discussed, but could someone remind me of what smoothing would mean?
So we did discuss the potential to smooth it. We haven't received any guidance on that, but we could model that. I think the challenge would be to smooth it in a way that ensures that we get the investment we require and don't breach the debt cap, but we haven't done any modelling on that at this stage.
And with the LGFA, I wasn't there for that one. Did they give an overall position on council's overall position for credit for the borrowing, or? Because I noticed on here it's not in the part of the plan. DIA have commented.
So I don't think, and looking at Paul and Amanda, we've had any assessment from LGFA in terms of our borrowing capacity or whether they think we would get a credit rating or not. So we haven't had that at this stage. We haven't started the process of applying for a credit rating.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Hannah. Warren, you started out by saying that you had concluded that there was, I wrote this down, a very wide gap between your definition of sustainability and what is in our plan. And you then spent a good deal of time talking about intervention options and the fact that there were two, namely the appointment of a facilitator and a water specialist. And you then focused particularly on the role of the water specialist and his or her capacity or ability to determine outcomes for a council or group of councils. Do I take it from that emphasis that at this point that is DIA's most likely conclusion, recommendation or suggestion to the Minister?
Yes, that's fair, and that is the reason I did outline that scenario, because if you have a situation where putting in a Crown facilitator is unlikely to resolve the issues that have been identified, then it just feels more efficient to move straight to the specialist, where they have the ability to look and direct potential groupings if that is the perceived solution. Again, it would be no more than a recommendation and a further conversation with the Minister. The decision rests with the Minister, but that would be the advice based on the current understanding and information for us.
And I can add some richness to that, because having seen the numbers and the impacts of the plan itself, our assessment of it, adjusting some of the variables. There was a conversation around smoothing. The impact of smoothing may not address the concerns that we have around the level of the price increase required up front. So that I can see why these things have been done, late investments, early revenue takes, but it just makes it more challenging to make this more viable from a consumer perspective.
If I'm supplementary then, okay, so you have explicitly said yes, the most likely recommendation from the department to the minister, enjoying your statutory abilities as granted you in the Act, your recommendation is at this point most likely to be that a specialist should be appointed. What, if any, steps would you suggest the council might take between now and the 3rd of September, should it take the view that that is not an outcome likely to contribute to retention of local control or outcomes we want?
So, firstly, just to reiterate and put context to my earlier response, that is based on the draft plan that we have in front of us at the moment, the information made available to us at the moment. That is not an official assessment, that is a view held at this point, but that's not a formal position held by DAA. To your question, I think we've always been upfront that the Waitaki Council, being part of the Southern Group, appears to be the best response to the challenges in front of this council and your neighbours in terms of achieving the scale and greater ability to respond to some of these issues differently. So that's our view. The decision rests with you, and we respect that decision. This is local water done well, but based on the advice that we have presented in this letter, I think it's clear that we currently feel that going alone is not a viable option for the council. So therefore, the decision rests with you as to the alternatives. The alternatives seem to be grouping up with other councils.
Thank you, Councillor Blacklow.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the last commentary kind of leads on nicely to a question I have, which is through your assessment, what in the financial sustainability or work program achievability is significantly different from the Waitaki component that was projected by Morrison Lowe and the Southern Water Done Well modelling?
I think the answer to that one is around the parameters by which we evaluate group offerings over individual councils. I mean, if we go back to what the fundamental objectives of local water done well are, we've talked about local decision making, but one of the key objectives we've also had is about councils working collectively together. And with that objective missing, we place a higher level of scrutiny over the numbers. But there are some factors that kick in as a result of the level of efficiencies that have been taken up in that southern grouping that I would question have been quite conservative. But I think ultimately there would be savings as a result, which would impact ratepayers or consumers of water services in Waitaki region.
So are we saying that multiple entity scenarios are being assessed and measured against different criteria to which an in-house model is being assessed?
Purely on the basis of what the objectives of local water done well are, yes.
Thank you. With respect to some comments made earlier around the affordability, would you accept that that's actually a technicality on the basis that would have occurred anyway, according to the modelling under Southern Water Done Well? and it's just essentially reinstated depreciation.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, but the propensity to find savings to address that over time probably greater with working with other councils than working alone.
Thank you. And just one more at this stage. Talked about investment being late in the piece. One of the kind of areas and I think good scope for improvement in and around our asset management is fully understanding the condition of the asset itself. And you've noted that in the report that there's some gaps there around understanding where things are at overall with the asset. So surely late investment isn't necessarily a bad sign. You know, could it be that you know with further investigation we're essentially you know, planning and focusing on a renewals program or plan that aligns with the survival curves, as opposed to whatever any given age of an asset is.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. Only counter to that for me is we have to assess full financial sustainability and full environmental compliance by 30 June 28. And what we're not seeing is the level of investment required to get the compliance that's currently required to get you past that post. So having investment at the back end of it, I agree with you that you need to have your assessments right and you need to get your planning right and all that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, you don't have the time and luxury to do that with some of the compliance issues you have. So that'd be the only counter I'd put in there.
We have Mayor Gary Kuchar online with a question or a comment.
Kia ora koutou. Afternoon, everyone. Just a question following on from Councillor Lackler's comments around depreciation. Is it reasonable to expect that if we were in a more efficient situation where we would be saving costs of perhaps 15–20%, that with depreciation would be able to be set to that level rather than the current level of valuation? Is there, do you know if there's any latitude in that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, ultimately you're swapping out. What we're saying is depreciation needs to be there. You need to be able to fund renewals over time and into the long term with integrity. But you're right, if there's savings to be had through this council or through grouping, then those savings could be reflected back as lower prices, which may leave you at the same position you are today, but by the mix is not right, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor McCone.
Yeah, sorry, I've been away from this for a while and I'm still struggling with quite a few of the issues that are going on. So I can get my head around it. Are we working with the factor of one, therein being that all the assets and infrastructure is going to hit its use by date in 10 years' time and must be replaced? And are we using that factor of one that it is across three forms of water, as in drinking water, stormwater and wastewater? And we've missed out the rural perspective. And where I'm coming from there, Waitaki is a provincial district that covers 7,000 odd square kilometres, but its urban population only covers between 6 and 10 square kilometres. So are we writing a piece of paper that's going to cover everything but doesn't actually control anything?
Yeah. So I may have misinterpreted the question. So for sake of me giving the wrong answer, are you asking, do you expect all assets to be replaced within the 10-year time frame? Or have I missed the question?
Yeah, so the assumption we're making on the replacement and the cost of replacement is based on what?
Based on the estimated lives that you have for your assets. So if your factor of one is replacing everything in 10 years' time, then I would say you're working to a factor of 0.2 where assets are replaced probably over 50 years. Does that make sense?
I think so. I have to think about that for a minute.
So what we're saying is that current position doesn't address that efficient replacement over a 50-year period. So there are challenges in addressing the long-term integrity of the infrastructure because there's been insignificant or a lack of appropriate levels of investment to date.
So I'm trying to get my head around that. There's so many different wheels turning in this whole process. And, Infometrics tell us that in 10 years' time, the population of the Waitaki district is going to increase by 2,000 people, roughly. So if you break that down into simple stuff, that's 200 people per year. The average family size is 4, so that's 50 families every year that are going to need some form of water infrastructure in the district. So where are we actually coming from with the basis of 10 years and what are we actually doing? We have a fixed circle of supply.
Okay.
And I'm
I understand. I understand your question. So we're just taking a window. The legislation that we're not asking for a 50-year plan. We're asking for a window, a snapshot over the next 10 years of what the activities of the water service entity will look like. Yes, it should take into account a broader strategy and investment strategy that says there's an infrastructure here that has a 50 to 100-year life, and we want to maintain that over a long period of time. And these are the right levels of investment and operations to make that happen. But the 10-year window should still reflect that outcome. And what we're saying is growth is a good example. You've said there'll be 50 houses per year. The average cost per house across New Zealand is around $50,000 per household. The revenue that's being captured is probably not 50,000 at the moment as a DC from Waitaki. So you're creating a situation that's not sustainable into the long term.
Thank you, Councillor Blickler. You had another question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I just wanted to touch on the affordability aspect that's come through in the summary provided. If we go back to the Southern Water Done Well consultation document, which graphs out the various scenarios that we consulted on, basically the in-house business unit and the Southern Water Done Well costings on a per household basis, including just for Waitaki, virtually comes out the same. So, and from our look at the draft that went to you guys last week, those numbers broadly align with those numbers that were projected back when the consultation went to the community. So what's the difference in perspective around affordability to the householder over the 10-year period when, as I say, the charges are modelled as almost being identical?
Yeah, I think that's another good question. I think the answer to that from our perspective is not all councils will pass all the measures that we have set forth as parameters. So our 2.5% target will probably not be achieved by 30% of councils as we move forward with the new approach under Local Water Done Well. But that's not something that would fail it in isolation. What we're saying here is there are a combination of factors that contribute to us making a call around the sufficiency of investment, the financial sustainability, and other aspects that will lead us to say the plan doesn't quite pass the overall test and guidelines that we've set for a successful water service delivery plan. But I can talk specifically about that affordability thing if you want to. But for me, I think the ultimate solution would be, well, we'd ask you to find another option that would allow you to get that affordability metrics down. And one option could be the whole of the South Island combining together might make that work, if that's the answer.
Thank you. And then with again, kind of to affordability and the credit rating aspect and around headroom for council. Last week, when LGFA spoke to us in a similar setting, they indicated that from their perspective that we were talking about something that's an affordability issue as opposed to any risk around access to capital. So I just wondered if, given the comments that were made earlier in the session by yourselves, I just wondered if you had, any comment on that slightly conflicting perspective.
Yep, but again, that's another great question. So at the moment, if you're securing all your funding through LGFA, you're getting the benefit of others that are credit rated and the scale and size of their book. So there is still an advantage to getting a proper credit rating, which would allow you to get a higher debt level within your own council, which may help alleviate some of the concerns that we have around the water entity. But ultimately, there are also some ring fencing provisions in the legislation that say, as DIA, we have to assess this water service entity in a standalone position so that we can make sure that it's viable in its own right, regardless of the council guarantee to support the water infrastructure moving forward. So 500% for an individual water service entity is probably at the limits of what a ring-fenced entity looks like if we apply the economic regulation regime that's likely to come into play over the next 6 months. So there's two aspects. It's economic regulation as well as LGFA's ability to fund this or finance this at a cost-effective way.
I wonder if this would be a good opportunity to hand over to Stu from Morrison Lowe. So we haven't had much time to think about this, but we've got some thoughts about initial response and how we might deal with some of the things listed in there, but there are other items in there that are going to be more challenging for us to deal with. So I think it might be good if we heard from Stuart and then had your feedback on that and your thoughts on that to enable us to continue to develop our water services delivery plan.
Sorry, just taking myself off mute. So Angela's going to share, Amanda, sorry, is going to share some slides for us on this. I'm not going to dwell on the process so far. I think you're all pretty familiar with this, and given time constraints, I don't think it's worth going through. So you've already heard a lot of this from the horse's mouth, as they say. In terms of the water services delivery plan being tested against the revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency, and financing sufficiency tests, DIA has provided some of that feedback, and of course we've obviously discussed that already today. So if we move on to what I'm going to do, sorry, is just take you through where we've read through that feedback, where we think there are issues that can be dealt with relatively efficiently and easily, and where there might be some other issues. And I'll take on just some of the comments that I have picked up from people asking questions as well, to the extent that I can. So some of the key points are that there's not enough information in the draft plan to determine whether the proposed level is sufficient, and that they're unable to confirm the level of investment is fully funded by projected revenues and access to financing. We'll get onto the financing bit a little bit later, but I think the critical thing with the investment to address specific compliance and regulatory requirements, we've been through that with some of your asset management team. There is probably a bit of additional cost that probably does need to come in relation to investment to meet some compliance. In the context of the overall program, that is not a significant amount of additional capital. I haven't tallied that up before this meeting, but I would say it's in the kind of 20 million over 10-year space, not much bigger than that is off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that one next week, Tim. But one thing is that there is a lot of narrative that can be added there. So there is actually a lot of investment in there already around compliance, And we just need to tie those bits up. So identify where there's a compliance issue and what the investment response is there in that plan. So a lot of that is dealt with in the narrative in terms of that better linkage there. With the renewals backlog, again, we have got a lot of data around what that renewals backlog looks like, so we can incorporate that within the plan, and certainly that renewals backlog is getting managed over time. So we just need to, it's a case of supplementing the data in this plan around some of this stuff, particularly around the asset investment. And also the asset condition data and the water loss stuff. So we've already added some narrative to the draft water services delivery plan at this stage that hasn't been circulated yet. It's just our working draft around what asset condition and water loss and council's response to that. So council has historically taken what is probably more of a reactive approach to investment in its water network, and particularly in relation to breakages and water loss, but is shifting towards a proactive approach. So we just need to make sure that we've got a bit of clarity around the story around that, and where there is investment again provided for within our OPEX plans, particularly to deal with water loss and improving our condition data. So some of this is, I guess, this is the good news. This is the stuff that we can probably solve relatively quickly and relatively easily within the plan. If we move on to the next slide though, Amanda, this is where we start to get a little bit more tricky. So Marlon's already talked about the planned 61% increase in 26-27. We absolutely can smooth that. That 61% increase is literally just the impact of us fully funding depreciation in that year. So we can take a little bit longer to do that. If we look at the Preliminary Arrangements Act and Bill 3, neither of those explicitly require us to fully fund depreciation in terms of the language in that plan. Bill 3 does have a requirement that we fully fund our operating costs, which would typically be expected to include depreciation. But much like Section 100 of the Local Government Act, it also includes provisions to take a slightly different approach if you consider that it is financially prudent to do so. So we would probably lean on that financial prudence requirement to be able to smooth that cost. What I would say is that smoothing that and deferring those revenue increases means that our debt profile will get a bit steeper. So we'll accumulate debt earlier on in the plan. That may mean that we hit a debt problem a little bit earlier, or that our interest costs ramp up. So it's not a simple, we just defer it out. It will have to be smoothed over a period of time. If our debt's higher and our interest costs are higher, smoothing may have the impact of increasing charges by 2034, albeit maybe marginally. So we still have to get to the same point eventually. At some point, we have to get to the same level of charges. So the end point will be the same, and as Amanda's pointed out here in the slides, this needs to be balanced with achieving the compliance of the covenants throughout the period. And really critical, which we haven't got into yet, is that financing sufficiency covenant. So especially if we are constrained to a 175% debt to revenue limit at a council level, that's going to be really difficult to manage if we are smoothing out our revenue increases. So I think the simple answer is revenue does need to be increased relatively rapidly. We have a compliance date of 30th of June 2028 for full financial sustainability. So we still need to make sure that we can demonstrate that we are going to be financially sustainable by that point. And I guess the really hairy one is probably, I think it's on the next slide, Amanda. Yes, it is around that financing sufficiency comment. So when we pair the issues around revenue sufficiency and the high rates rises, the concerns about affordability, with these particularly strongly worded comments around the likelihood for us to get a credit rating, we're going to get into some pretty hairy challenges, because to be frank, we need a credit rating to be able to keep to the price path that we have in there. If we are increasing our investment, we need a credit rating even more. if we could develop a plan that stays within the 175%. To do that would increase charges substantially over and above what's already in that plan. I do note DIA have noted here that that even if we do get to 280%, that would increase their concerns further about affordability. I would actually be interested in DIA's thoughts on the behind that comment, because from my perspective, local water done well, one of the big things around that is the ability to leverage more debt through that through those arrangements. And certainly in the short to medium term, accessing more debt would presumably alleviate affordability. Over the longer term, maybe not so much. But as long as we've got a view to long term when we're setting our prices and our revenue approach, I wouldn't have thought that increasing the debt limits would create concerns regarding affordability, certainly not in the 10-year window that we're dealing with here. But that said, it is still worth noting that, you know, the combination of these issues is the problem, I think, that we're dealing with. Just to touch on some of those other comments around affordability, look, and I can't speak for DIA's view here, but for the information that I guess we're presented in this water services delivery plan and the pricing, I think, and taking on board DIA's comments, I think the prices and the affordability metrics that you're seeing in that plan and in DIA's comments present probably what's close to a best case scenario for Waitaki, whereas what we present for Southern Water Done Well, when we have looked at, you know, independent advice around what potential efficiencies might be, is probably closer to the worst case scenario. So I think giving DIA a bit of latitude there when they are comparing those two options, they probably also have some of that in mind when they're looking at those affordability metrics and how that might end up looking. Do we have any more slides here, Amanda? Yeah, so yeah, like I say, there's some really easy stuff to deal with, but some of the challenges we're going to have is that balance between investment sufficiency, financial sustainability, and that revenue sufficiency, particularly if we're going to have trouble with LGFA credit rating. So in order to get that credit rating, I think Amanda might be able to talk to some of this a bit better than I can, but we've got a history of having budgeted and actual deficits at a council level. What we need to get to is a point of probably balanced budget for LGFA to get some confidence, and probably our credit agencies to get some confidence. It's worth noting that that credit environment at the moment has seen a number of councils get credit downgrades over the last few years. And some of those councils that have experienced credit downgrades are significantly larger than Waitaki District Council. So it is worth, I guess, just having that in mind. This forecast $14 million loss in 26-27, a big chunk of that is already resolved through that massive 61% price increase that we've got in the plan at the moment. But a reasonable chunk of that would still have to come, you know, that's outside of the water services activity, and would also see rates elsewhere in council rise if our credit raters and the credit markets were looking for that in order for us to get a credit rating. So if Bancorp and LGFA were suggesting we needed a balanced budget, we have the price rises related to water, as well as potentially some price rises relating to other activities within council to be able to get to that point. Moving on, I think we might be at a point, and that's the end of it, which is good. I think given we've only got another 15 minutes scheduled at the moment, I'll leave it there and let people ask questions or comment if they want to.
Thank you for that, Stu. Did we want to go to Amanda to cover off the next section, or do we have any immediate comments on the top of any of the councillors' minds? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stu, I'm just trying to get, I mean, in the end, have you guys done any, or can our officers, based on the information and or proposal suggestions you've given them, can you actually, can you quantify what might be needed by way of, you talk about, we have to have plans to fund the renewal backlog. We have to have a proactive plan regarding water loss. So have you quantified the capital sums potentially required to be invested in those activities? Equally, do I take it that when you say the 61% can be smoothed, am I right in assuming that there will nonetheless be a 61% or greater increase in costs, simply abstracted over a number of years rather than one?
Yeah. So to answer your first point, Councillor Hopkins, I think my response is that we are in the motions of costing that out. So we have the information that we need to from talking through your asset managers around most of that, around the asset costs, the stuff around the condition and the water loss in terms of getting more data and being a bit more proactive. That's already part of your strategy in terms of your water services delivery stuff. So it's more about us telling that story more clearly and more fully in the water services delivery plan. The 61%, if we move on to that second part of the question, you are correct. We can smooth it, so we can avoid that hit all happening in 1 year. But that hit will have to happen at some point, and I kind of liken that to the area under the curve is always the area under the curve. Doesn't matter what shape we make it. So we eventually have to get to that point, and it's a matter of, do you go out with the painful cost increases to your ratepayers once and get it over and done with, rip the band-aid off, or do you go out to your ratepayers 3 times and feel the pain every time you go out to your ratepayers because you've smoothed it and done 20% after 20% after 20%. So, which I would say is kinder to the ratepayers, but certainly not kinder to you as elected members who have to front that every year for 3 years. So, there's no easy answer in that scenario, unfortunately.
Supplementary, if I may. You also said in your presentation and the slides that revenue will need to be increased in the 2026-27 year. So how much and what are the rating impacts of that? Or how much do you believe it needs to be increased by? And can you amplify the statement that we must be financially sustainable by 2028? Again, what does that mean? And what are the rating implications?
Yeah. So you've got me running to pull up the Local Government Preliminary Arrangements Act right now, Councillor Hopkins, but just so I can give you the actual legislative definition of that. But what I can say is, yes, rates will have to increase in 25-26. The extent to which we increase them, I guess, is part of the function of that smoothing question. So we could increase them by only 5% and defer the uplift into a future year. But ultimately, I would suggest that if we are looking at smoothing, we'd probably be doing that over a 5 or so year period, which would mean we'd probably have to increase rates by at least 15% to be able to, in 25-26, it probably close, or 26-27, at probably a bare minimum. Noting that also, we need to meet those requirements of a credit rating agency to be able to secure that credit rating. And we'll need to be able to demonstrate a level of financial sustainability for a number of years for that credit rating agency to be comfortable. In terms of your question around financially sustainable, if I go to the strict definition of what financially sustainable means in the Preliminary Arrangements Act, it's that your revenue is sufficient to ensure long-term investment in delivering water services, and that you're financially able to meet all of your regulatory standards and requirements. So that's where we come back to those revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency tests. The regulatory requirements is demonstrated through that investment sufficiency test. Do we have enough money coming in to meet the compliance issues that we have in our community and make sure that we are demonstrating that investment? As I touched on before, we think that we're most of the way there in terms of the actual planned investment, but there is still a little bit of an uplift, and more importantly, there's a lot more storytelling that has to happen in the plan to be able to demonstrate that to both DIA and I believe their partners who will be reviewing the investment sufficiency work, Becca. The revenue applied towards those services, so that's going to be a function of making sure that we have enough money in terms of access to borrowing as well as enough revenue to cover. It talks about the long-term investment, but what we're really looking at here is to cover our operating costs and to be able to set aside enough money to plan to be able to deal with that investment in the future, whether that be through debt or revenue. But we need to be able to make sure that we can demonstrate the combination of those two is enough. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I was wondering whether Paul or Amanda might want to come in here, because essentially what we need to pass here is two financial sustainability tests. There's the financial sustainability test of the water plan, but because the water is staying within council, to get the credit rating, we need to show that we're financially sustainable to the credit rating agency. So as well as water charges going up, I'm assuming that means also the rates for the rest of the services would need to go up to make sure that we're at least running a balanced budget across the rest of the services. I was trying to invite Amanda and Paul into comment, but they're not taking the invitation at the moment as our sort of financial experts around the table.
Here's a point I'm trying to get to. There's already been one letter in the Oamaru Mail this week from a ratepayer who's concerned at the reports that have come from these public workshops, identifying with alarm the proposed rate increases that may arise as a consequence of this. So all I'm trying to do, for our benefit and the community at large, and the benefit of the community at large, is see if it is possible to get any indication of what the quantum of rate increases may need to be if we are going to pass these various tests set by the DIA. And I see no evidence from what they've said to us today that they are particularly of a mind to actually burst out in tears and say, oh, we're completely wrong and everything you've challenged us about is proof that we need to rethink our position. I don't see it happening. Just don't. So what I'm trying to get to is, can anyone tell me if Stu says we have to have this major increase next year, how much? What does financial sustainability by 2028 mean? And how many years have we got? If we're not bunging rates up 61% in 1 year, are we going to have 3 years of 10% rises for water alone, or 5 years of 3%, or 5%, I should say, 10 years for... Sorry.
What I can say, Councillor Hopkins, looking at the financial modelling that we've got that backs this up, and noting that there possibly are some not all of this information, it doesn't incorporate any adjustments to non-Three Waters revenue. But in that year that we have an increase of water charges of 61%, if we looked at Waitaki District Council's total revenue requirement for that year, and that does include non-rates revenue, so unfortunately I can't get right down to a rates level, that's about a 17% uplift that year in terms of what rates are compared to 25-26. So the 61% increase in water charges translates to about 17 or 18% increase in rates overall, ignoring any increase that might come because we also need to meet financial sustainability elsewhere in council.
This information on your screen right now is our long-term plan. So in the 27 financial year, we were predicting a 7% rates rise. And just bearing in mind, these are the actual numbers in our approved long-term plan that, how do I go up? That third column in there, 2027, we have a $14 million deficit. So even with that 7% rates rise, we are not receiving enough revenue to cover our expenditure. And also in 26 and 27, we are not funding depreciation on waters. So if we're talking about bringing forward smoothing the rates increase that's currently predicted for 2028, that's been talked about in this previous workshops, in DIA today, you know, talked about 61% in that 28 financial year. If we want to smooth that, we also need to think about in the 27 financial year, fixing this $14 million deficit, whether we want to fund water's depreciation, and it's also on top of a 7% rates rise, just for doing business as usual. So putting all that together, you can see that it's going to be pretty significant double digits. It will smooth the 28 year, but there's still going to be significant, like 20–30% rates rises for a few years there.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCone, did you have a comment to make? I missed you earlier.
I've lots of comments to make really, but I'll only make one. So I did hear you say, Stu, the figures that you were looking at are based on the worst case scenario. I would like to think that is the case of what you're saying. I've been involved with bits of stuff, and we find that what we actually budget for, you budget for the worst and hope for the best, and it usually works. So on that basis, I'm hopeful that the figures you're giving are actually probably 20 or 30% out of kilter in favour of being too high. But we're forever hopeful that that could be the case. So the other question I ask, and it's to anybody in the room that can answer it, for the infrastructure that we're being asked to do and upgrade, are the people on the ground actually to do it physically there, and what time frame do we need to do in each certain part of the systems, and do we have those systems in place and prioritised on how we're going to do them?
I don't think that was a question for me, although we'll quickly respond to the first part, Councillor McCone, which is, I think you might have misheard me when I said the worst case was the Southern Water Dam. The modelling for Southern Water Dam well probably presents the worst case price path in terms of very conservative efficiency estimates, and noting that those efficiencies aren't fully baked in 2034. For Waitaki District Council, I guess the only way that the numbers here are the worst case is if you don't spend enough on the same amount on your assets as what is projected. And typically we see that successive LTPs usually require more investment in capital works rather than less. But so anyhow, I'll let Josh respond to the substantive part of your question there, Councillor McCone.
Thank you. Just with respect to deliverability, historically council's delivered about 80% of what it plans to do in terms of capital improvements. We'll be in the situation where we can't only deliver 80% to meet the requirements they're going to need to meet, which is going to mean that either we focus and prioritise a larger proportion of our delivery solely on water related activities, or we scale up our delivery program with additional project management staff, invest more heavily in improved partnerships within contract models, etc., to try to streamline how we can deliver and achieve more with less. Fundamentally, this needs to be the priority for the next few years.
Thank you. We'll go to Mia Kutcher online.
Thanks again, Hannah. Yeah, I think when we're making comments around the expected rate rises based on everything else being the way way we put in our long-term plan, I think we need to qualify it all by saying that we absolutely have to work on minimising costs in every other part of council to make sure that rate rises remain as affordable as possible. So, yeah, we made the decision. We knew we were going to be paying, or our ratepayers were going to be paying a lot more per household than if they were going to be in a joint CCO. We've made our decision. We've got to make sure that we now cut the cloth to fit. And when we're saying about 25%, 30% rate increases, we've got to really look at the other side of that, which is outside of water. What are the other things that we're going to be able to cut back on? If there's a question in there, I think it's really to Alex, and that's just what is the timing We've talked about it a little bit around, having to redo the LTP and so forth. Are there any things that we can actually do in this current financial year to make some changes?
I'm not sure what we can do in this financial year. I think we need to go through the LTP amendment process. Obviously, we're starting to think about that now. I think the challenge you have is that the water's numbers are so big that you're not talking about reducing some things. You're talking about stopping doing certain things altogether. And I mentioned before that the sum total of the depreciation is more than what we spend on the library, the opera house, the gallery, the museum, and the aquatic centre put together. Those are the sort of sums we're talking about if you want to reduce the impact on ratepayers. But those are the sort of things we'll need to consider if we're going to minimise the impact on ratepayers from the cost increases that we're facing.
Thank you. I think we might have a final question or comment from Councillor Blackwell. I'm just thinking we're running out of time for today's workshop.
Thank you. I do have a question, but just a quick comment, regarding the commentary around rates rises in general. I mean, we've got two scenarios here, don't we? We've got rates plus a water service organisation, which equals household cost. We've got rates including water, which equals household costs, both of which are similarly modelled over the 10-year period, and one of which gives no consideration to stranded overheads. So I'll just make that statement. But regarding the Stu, just a question for you regarding the your commentary around the worst case versus best case scenario in either structure. With respect to our lack of information around asset condition and our forward projections around capital spend, largely based on the age of the asset as opposed to the condition, what would your general comments be around potential scope for an improved landscape or a redistributed spend in terms of the landscape there?
Look, I mean, I think you might actually be better directing that question at Josh, but I'll have a go. A lot of the costs that are driving the investment program here aren't renewals costs or replacement of aging assets. A lot of the costs that are in your plan relate to resilience programs or compliance upgrades. So those upgrades, we know we're not compliant, or we know a consent is expiring, or in the case of some of those resilience projects, particularly the wastewater, like rising main duplication and relocation, those are related to issues that are predominantly driven by resilience and climate effects, erosion, that are going to have to happen, and that probably further information on conditional performance of those assets isn't likely to change the need for that investment. The renewals investment, absolutely. The more we learn about our network, the more we might have the ability to sweat our assets further, and certainly there are some assets in the network, I'm thinking of the cast iron water pipes in particular, that do seem to exceed their estimated life expectations and do seem to be performing better than maybe the useful life might expect. So there is some opportunity for council to have a look at that renewals program and shift some of that, or to be able to spread some of that cost over a longer period of time. But I wouldn't suggest that that's going to move the dial significantly in terms of what your capital program is, particularly when we look at some of the compliance upgrades that Josh presented last week that probably need to be added back in as well. So I think by the time you add those back in, if you're lucky, moving those renewals profiles around a little bit might net you about the same as where you're already at. But Josh might have a more full response to that.
No, look, thank you very much, Stuart, for that. I suppose last week I did cover off a presentation that detailed compliance-related costs, renewals and improvements for each of the different water services for water, wastewater and stormwater. I showed what we had originally anticipated needing to invest in 2024 and then what we set in the long-term plan. Obviously, there was a significant difference between the initial investment requirement in 2024, where we delayed a lot of investment as long as possible to try to minimize increases through to 2025. I'm happy to recirculate that presentation if you'd like, but essentially it's not just renewals that's driving a lot of the cost increases. There's significant compliance issues that need to be dealt with, as well as some fundamental improvement issues around resilience and capacity.
Councillor McCone, then Councillor Holding.
No, we have a crack. So Josh, on page 3 of your presentation, you've got a capital works program summary there. Compliance related costs, is that across all of them or is that per group of water, wastewater, stormwater?
You'll see the table there. It shows water and compliance related costs. In the current LTP is to then you see wastewater and compliance related costs somewhere. So I'll classify it by each.
Okay. Yep.
I was on mute then. I apologize. Yeah, I can. It was page 3. Hold on one moment.
Just while you're looking, Councillor Holding and then Councillor Thompson, you had a question or comment?
Just into our draft plan, Josh, I guess it's the 10-year thing, but have we, like, we're legally possible, prioritise those compliant ones first, deliver the most impact, then deferring the lower risk work? And put in?
Yep. So to Councillor McCone's first question, this was the presentation that was provided last week. You can see there that water, wastewater and stormwater each have a section for compliance related, renewals related and improvement related activities. 2024 there shows what the initial investment requirement was from an officer's perspective to ensure that we're sustaining a workable network that was compliant. That was heavily reduced to try to minimise cost increases as much as possible. With respect to prioritising compliance upgrades in particular, we've already pushed the majority, pretty much all of the wastewater compliance related items out as far as we possibly can. The water related compliance requirements, we are required to meet the drinking water standards by 30 June 2027. So irrespective of priority of investment in that, it is required to be complete by 2027. We then get into issues of water security and supply resilience that also need to be addressed, which currently aren't funded in the plan by and large. Does that answer your questions?
Yep, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that we're actually here to consider local water done well. I would suggest that the time constraint and the questions and the pressure being applied by the government via Department of Internal Affairs suggests that what we're actually doing is local democracy done poorly.
Yeah, we might have just one more from Councillor Hopkins. I'm just mindful about time.
That has been my argument all along. It's what I said on July the 8th. The previous government nationalised everything without debate or by leave. This government has given councils more latitude, but in the end, only as much as it is willing to do. And I mean, that's precisely what we've heard repeatedly from its officials. My question to Josh is, can we take it, that in addition to the budgeted 7% in the LTP at the moment, And Amanda's estimated 17% increase related to water to achieve the 61% increase in water use charges, plus whatever quantum we allocate to actually remove or reduce the $14 million deficit, plus however much we additionally rate for the unfunded water depreciation. Is it proper to assume that the figures in front of us, effectively, when you look at what Stu said about the renewal backlog needing to be funded, the water loss problem needing to be treated proactively, not reactively, and so on, the existence of, or the relative underfunding of stormwater, are we entitled to assume that in order to come some way towards meeting what DIA sets out as its terms of reference or conditions or prerequisites, that the figures on the right are going to move closer to the figures on the left? In other words, 28 million is going to become closer to 119, 50 is going to come closer to 68, and 10 is going to come closer to 29.
Sorry, short answer. It's the numbers to the right there, which is the current setting in the 2025 LTP, are low. They're not high.
So the answer is yes.
Are they going to move to that degree upwards? That probably depends on our approach to service level settings and capacity upgrades and resilience issues and so on and so forth. But ultimately, yes, over the next probably 20-year period, rather than necessarily in the next 10-year period, this is the kind of quantum of investment that's going to be needed in the water's infrastructure.
Thank you.
But yeah, just to clarify, we don't expect us to move back to those 2024 figures within this 10-year. That program was put together in what was, an unconstrained environment. We're in a constrained environment around our community's affordability, and so that's the key issue: is how do we balance off what we need to do so that we meet that investment test whilst keeping it affordable and making sure that we're financially sustainable. So that's what we'll be looking to do. We've got another workshop next week where we'll present back to you the adjustments we've made, some of the thinking around what we might do around smoothing. Essentially, that's our last workshop before we can bring something to council for agreement if we're going to meet the 3rd of September deadline. So we've got quite a bit of work to do between now and then. A lot of the work is around the narrative, so explaining to DIA what we're doing, but we'll need to do some more work around making sure that we've got a sufficient programme and how that is funded and how we can meet those financial sustainability tests, but also address that point around the financial sustainability of council overall so that we're able to get a credit rating, because that's what this hinges on as well, being able to deliver it in-house. So that's the work we'll do. I'll try and get back to you on that between now and next week. If we manage to get sufficiently far on that, then we'll look at bringing it to the scheduled council meeting. But there is a lot of work to do on that. So we may need that, additional council meeting that we've got for the following week to be able to achieve that. Paul, you look like you want to say something. Okay.
Okay, I think that brings us to a natural close, as we have a lot of information that has been presented to us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Stu from Morrison Lowe for joining us and for giving us at least some options. Like no matter how grim it is, we still have to advocate as much as possible for our community. And I think at the end of the day, that's part of our representative role. Thank you to our CE and our officers as well, and those members of the public, and Mayor Gary Kuchar and Councillor Linwood that are joining online. And we look forward to going through the adjustments next week. So thank you very much, everybody.